also with Workplace Education Manitoba, and I'm so happy to be your host and support today at Email Etiquette for the Business Professional. Before I introduce our instructor today, I'd like to go over some features that you'll be using during your webinar and some troubleshooting as well. On the top of your screen, you'll see 3 icons, a smile emoji, a question mark, and a telephone. The emoji will open up a variety of expressions, such as thumbs up or thumbs down. And also the instructor will ask you for feedback, and you can use those as emojis as well. The question mark in the blue box will allow you to ask questions that the instructor will answer after the webinar's over, and also for private comments as well, and the instructor will prompt you to use that option as well. The telephone is for you if you need to switch to the telephone during your webinar today. Lastly, there's an option for you to chat, and the instructor will ask you to do group comments and interaction as well. I've shared 2 links for support. If you get into any trouble or need questions or more support, you can use those as well. I've included my email address, which is lorusso@wem.mb.ca, and I'll be checking my email often to see if you have any questions or need support. And also for anyone who's on the telephone today, my telephone number for text-only option is 204-770-4864. Now, moving forward, there is a link in the chat box for you for a handout that you can download onto your computer, and you can just take a moment to click on that. It'll download right away, that you can reference after the webinar's over. Our instructor today will not be asking you to look at that during the webinar, but we'll have some activities for you. But don't worry, just make sure you have it on your computer before we leave today. Now, I'm so excited to introduce our instructor, and her name is Rochelle Amy. She's had a professional career in education. She's been engaged in education and student development since 2000 in settings including university, K-12, and adult education. Amy's focus has been on the nonprofit sector and administrative and marketing and communications, and she's also done training sessions and instructed as well. She's an amazing instructor in essential skills, and she's been with WEM since 2019 and works at the Interlake West Center. She also works with different companies in Microsoft and Google, so she brings that value to her webinars as well, adding more value to the webinars. As well, she recently went back to school. I'm so very proud to announce this, that she's getting her master's degree in leadership. So she's an amazing person that will bring a lot of value, and we continue to have her back again and again. So please help me welcome Rochelle Amy with the applause emoji at the top of your screen. And Rochelle, you have the screen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jessica. How about the applause emoji for her? What would we do without her, right? We could not do this. So thank you, Jessica. I absolutely love collaborating with you and appreciate all that you do. And these learners with us today don't have a way to know how much you do behind the scenes. So let me just give her a shout out to you all. We're glad she's here because she keeps it all happening. It's so good. I wanted to just thank you for joining us last session. And as you know, we focused on the whole rubric for how to write and compose. Today, we want to transition to make sure that before we hit the send button, we've covered the tips and tricks to avoid the errors. So we're going to talk about proofreading and revision. Feel free to use a crying emoji if that makes you sad. That's like sort of the hard part to talk about, right? That's not really the icing on the cake. That's just like the baking powder in the cake. And it's a little bit boring, but that's the part that's so critical to building your credibility. So we really want to talk about the proofreading and revision component. And they're not the same. And then tips and tricks is fun because there's some real practical tools in there that you can take away with you to up your email game, and of course working with attachments. And then we do want to talk about what happens during crises and emergencies, just because we're reviewing the email etiquette for the business professional right now in a pandemic. So we think, let's give you the most helpful tools for right now, today, what you're experiencing with email. I really want to thank those of you who were able to send in your quote homework. It was great to read. You guys are really good at this, and you were able to take this big, long, convoluted sample email and pull that right down into a funnel in a way that made things organized. And I noticed something in common with each of the assignments that I read. They all looked similar to this. This one shows you in red where the revisions could happen. So of course, changing the subject line was critical, right? We really emphasized that in our last session together, that each email should have a targeted subject, and we keep them separate. If we have 5 different subjects to discuss, we often can separate those into 5 different emails so that someone's not confused with all of this rambly content in one email. So I saw that in a lot of the assignments that were sent in. And then of course, you know, the warm greeting to the colleague, and then filtering it right down to a point or a bullet format. I loved this. I think all of you did this actually, where you recognized I could take all of these sentences and put it into point form so that it's clear what we're working on. And then we remember our actual ask, right? It's like, I need the answer from you, or we need to talk about this, or here's our deadline. And so we have the actual call to action that we talked about in our last session. So really, it came down to 3 major things. We didn't want to miss the subject line. We all changed that. And then getting the content down to a bullet point form. And this doesn't work in every single email, but in this particular example that we worked on, because we were dealing with changing a presentation and we were trying to collaborate with someone, that's why we put it into the bulleted list, so everybody would know what it is we have to work on. And then of course that 3rd component was the call to action. So bravo, if I had the emoji button on my screen, I would give that back to you. Thank you for sending those in. Thank you for sending them in a timely manner. Just that alone, you guys, just shows you've got the business professional part down. It's awesome, awesome to see. And just to refresh on what we talked about last time with the writing process, there's the whole component of the planning and organizing. There's the writing, and there's the revising and proofreading. And can someone take a stab for me in the chat? Which one of these is the one that's usually forgotten? Last session together, I mentioned that one of these steps is usually the forgotten step, and people focus on a different step. Does anyone have an idea of what that might be? I'm going to give you a second to answer, and my computer just needs to be rejigged, so give me 1 moment to do that while you give me the answer. Which step gets missed? Okay, I think I got the technology bug worked. Thank you. I've got a private message here from someone suggesting that we often miss step 3. That is true. That's one that we don't love doing, and we hit the send button a little too quickly sometimes. But it's actually step 1. The planning and the organizing is usually what we miss, because when we think of email, we think of writing an email, right? So we pop open the email program and we just start writing, and we forget to plan and organize. But I saw in your assignments that you sent in, you guys were great at the planning and organizing. Of course, you did get to work with some content provided for you, but don't forget that one. And depending what kind of learner you are, sort of how your brain best brainstorms things, Remember that planning and organizing stage, that's the one to do by hand. It's really helpful to write that one out on a notebook before you take to typing it. But thank you for the learner who sent me this message just now. Absolutely, revising and proofreading is critical. If there's anything that would undermine your credibility, it's this one. And if you're maybe, we all have different trigger words or words that we trip up on sometimes. And if your word happens to be the word your, right? Like there's the Y-O-U-R, for a possessive sense, so your notebook, or there's the conjunction, the Y-O-U apostrophe R-E, representing you are, as in you are writing an email or you're writing an email. If that's one of your trip up on words, that's one of the ones to note. You need your own little dictionary on what your trip up words are, and maybe it's even someone's name, who knows. But we see how important grammar is, right? So we could leave a comma out of a sentence and our sentence ends up meaning something totally different. So if we wanted to say, let's eat, Grandma, calling to action that it's time to eat, we need that comma in there. Without it, it sounds like we're going to eat Grandma for lunch. We definitely don't want that. So I hope that this visual helps you just sort of put that proofreading and the revising up at the top of the list, sort of highest on the list for how important they are after you've crafted your email. It certainly affects your professionalism. And when I say you, I guess the part I really want to emphasize is your career is not usually really about you, right? It's usually about who you represent and what product, brand, or company you're working with. And so the whole idea of professionalism is that you're actually able to be the voice for your company through email. Now, you might underestimate that because maybe you're sending internal emails. Maybe you're not the person who emails the customer. Maybe you're emailing fellow colleagues and coworkers and so on. But really the whole aspect of image, professionalism, and messaging on what you're sending, you are sending it on behalf of a company. So every email you send becomes a part of your company's brand. So don't underestimate your impact and your professionalism when you're writing in the workplace. Of course, clarity is huge, right? We don't know what someone means so often by email. Can I get a witness? Can you give me an emoji if there's been a misconstrued email where we don't know what someone meant? We don't know the tone. We don't even know what they were asking for. Clarity is so key, and that really comes out in the proofreading time because something makes sense to you when you're writing it, but it's only later when you're reading it that you realize, oh, there's not a lot of clarity in what I just said. Of course, accuracy is huge. Imagine if you were emailing and you didn't proofread and you're emailing out a quote and you've got a wrong number represented in a quote, or a wrong date. You're promising to do work in July 2021 maybe is how your quote comes out instead of 2020. And it's so random how those mistakes can happen. I found just last week I was writing down the date and I was trying to write down, I think it was June 9th that I was writing, and I wrote it down. I had something I had to do and I went back to review it and I noticed I wrote July 9th. I have no idea why I jumped ahead a month in my writing, but it happens. And so it happens when you're not expecting it. That's the whole point of the proofreading part. And then, of course, the whole idea of rapport, because tone isn't something that we get by doing spell check. Spell check, grammar check, Grammarly, these things do not build tone and these things do not build rapport. And so being able to make sure that our rapport is in good standing with our colleagues is so critical. So here's some real practical tips for proofreading. Now this is in the handout that you've downloaded for today, but go ahead and jot it out too, because writing it out just helps seal it for us. My absolute favorite thing on this whole list unequivocally, number one is read out loud. I cannot tell you how different things work when you read it out loud. And even if it's a minor thing, certainly if it's huge, if it's policy, correction, something inflammatory that's happening in your environment and you have to respond by email, always read it out loud. But if it's even a minor thing, it's phenomenal. When you read it out loud, that's actually usually when you catch your own spelling errors, you'll for sure catch tone. But so often you'll catch the spelling because once your ears hear your own mouth say it, it sounds totally different than how you typed it out. Reading backwards is huge, and that doesn't mean reading from right to left. That's actually talking about reading your whole content backwards. So maybe starting at the bottom and working up through the paragraphs to see, did I have a logical flow? Because sometimes what we do is we rely on extra adjectives to help tie things together. And really by reading it backwards, we can pare down all of our adjectives and extra words because we can see whether or not there's the proper flow. Now, you've probably used spell check. That's great. It's a great tool. And there's other online tools. You know, a lot of the youth today are using Grammarly, and it's an online thing where you can run through your text to get ideas on spelling and on grammar. And so if that's an issue for you, don't be shy about that. Give yourself a personal policy to use spell check. Now, my spelling at a certain grade level, I think it was grade 7 or 8, my spelling for all the grade 7 or 8 vocabulary is through the roof. I'm like the best speller at that era of spelling because I had the most fun teacher for ELA, and she made spelling an absolute hilarious riot, and we all loved it. And so maybe you've got a certain era in time where spelling was absolutely huge for you, or maybe spelling's not your gig and it's just not your thing. Make it a point that you have a personal policy that you don't send anything out unless it gets spell checked, grammar checked, Grammarly, etc. Putting yourself in the reader's shoes is so huge, especially if there's any kind of emotion in it. And when I say emotion in it, we often think of anger when it relates to email, but actually think about urgency. That's one of the emotions that comes out in email is, I need this right away. And so putting yourself in the other person's shoes, do they see the sense of urgency and do they understand it? Or are you generating a sense of urgency that's maybe inappropriate? Maybe you made it sound bigger than it actually is, or maybe you've downplayed it, but this is a huge deal. So you've got to put yourself in their lens. What are they hearing? What are they able to see? And what time of day are they going to see the email at? That's huge, right? Asking for a helpful eye, please ask a colleague to proofread for you. Send it as a draft to someone or save it as a draft, have them read it in your thing. And another tip and trick that I use that I really like is I will take often what I want to write in an email, I'll write it in Microsoft Word or in Google Docs, and I'll write it out as a word processing document, not in my email program. And when I do that, it means I don't automatically send it in error, and it means I have helpful spell check formatting tools and things. Often the view that you have set up as your default in your word processing view is bigger and easier to navigate than the type of view settings you have set up in your email. So that's one of the biggest tricks I would recommend for you, especially if spelling and organizing and grammar is a concern. You'll be typing that not in your email program, but you'll be typing that in a word processor and then just doing your copy and paste to put that into your email. So some of the tips and tricks to help you with that writing so that when you're in this proofreading and revising stage, your email gets stronger, more concise, more effective, is to really consider, do you maybe want your call to action first? This works really well with teammates, or we see this often in a sales email. So a great example would be if you get a sales promotional email from a company, often they'll tell you right at the beginning, this offer will expire in 24 hours, or 2-day sale happening, and they give you the dates of it. And then they tell you the details after. So bear in mind, sometimes a call to action could actually be the very first thing you mention. Something like important meeting called for Friday at 9 a.m. Oh, who would schedule a Friday 9 a.m. meeting? That's terrible, but let's just say that's the scenario. That could go first. And then you could unpack why that's happening and what needs to happen in preparation for that email. So consider not always having that at the end, but actually putting it at the beginning. And in some extreme cases, that actually is a great subject line. So that's something in revision to think about. Is my call to action clear, and should it actually be at the beginning instead of the end? Because I know some emails have to be very, very detailed and comprehensive, and it can end up scrolling down 3 pages. So maybe having that one thing right at the beginning really helps. You can check out your email program. Depending the company you work for and what program and products they use, there is sometimes an ability to retrieve an email that you've already sent. So maybe you sent an email out announcing a sale or a quote or a deadline. Some email programs do offer you the ability to go retrieve that and pull it back, and then it disappears out of the receiver's inbox. It's a great tool. It's handy. I would not rely on this tool. Because one of the loopholes is if I were to send you an email and then hit the retrieve to pull it back, it would disappear out of your inbox. But in between that time, whether it was 10 seconds or 2 days, however long it was, you have the opportunity to copy that, forward it, download it, save it. So relying totally on that retrieval system, not ideal, but in an emergency, absolutely no, that is something you could look at about what your email program can do. Imagine that any email you're writing is about to get printed and posted up on a bulletin board. Now, I've been in a situation where I got to see this in a positive and a negative way. So often people wouldn't rely on company-wide email getting read by everyone. So if you were just going to email out, hey, this is happening on this day, someone in an effort to be helpful just hits print on that and goes and sticks it in the staff room on the bulletin board. And so whatever you wrote is printed out and becomes a poster. This can happen in a negative way too, where people can take what you did and make an example of it and say, oh, look at this. And that also can get put up in the staff room for everyone to see. So one of the rules of email that people try to think about is imagining what would happen if this got printed out. Am I okay with that? Is it okay? And is my spelling and grammar okay? Please give yourself the 24-hour rule. I know they do this in sports and they do this in certain teams, that when you're dealing with passionate issues, you can go ahead and write your email, save it as a draft, and just hang on to it. And give yourself the rule that nothing charged with emotion goes out from your inbox until 24 hours have passed. If it's a really big deal or there's legal matters involved, you might want to up the ante on that. That maybe that becomes the 48-hour rule, or that nothing goes out without going through the law office first. A consistent email address. This is tricky for those of us working out of multiple email addresses for different companies. Recognizing that when you're reaching out to that contact, there might be one email address that you check the most or that you have to use for your workplace. So try to email that contact consistently out of the same email address. So when they do a search for your name or the documents, or they want to reply to you, they know which email you'll actually read. Like I mentioned, I do love to run things through Word or Docs. Some people love Grammarly to double check things. And then make your own personalized list of hurdle words. If your word is your or their or whatever, make your own list on what your hurdles are and know what they are so that you can overcome them. Now that helped us a little bit with the technical aspect of the proofreading and the writing, but then there's also that etiquette aspect, right? There's the how do I relate to my colleagues here so that not just the things I said matter when they get printed on a bulletin board, but sort of the vibe I gave them and the level of professionalism I gave them matters and creates proper etiquette. So what's your word count? Do they have to scroll for pages? If they do, maybe the email's just a little too long. It should be very rare that your email is something that someone has to spend quite a bit of time reading. There's better tools for that in collaborating and sharing documents. Always, always take out the to line. This is tricky. If, let's say, your coworker emailed you and you go to answer them, what do? You click reply, right? Well, if you find that you're a little trigger happy with the send button, or there's just more details you're waiting on, delete the name that's in the to bar. Delete it. Of course, you'll be able to find it again. It takes 2 seconds to put the person's name back in. So delete who it's to. And this will help if you have an overactive email system. I know I worked with one company. They had this email program that would just randomly send the email. I could be in the middle of typing it, and all of a sudden if the server refreshed, the email would just get sent. So you can totally thwart that from happening if you take the name out of the to line. Consider the privacy and how much you're using BCC. A lot of people get themselves into etiquette trouble here because they blind carbon copy someone because maybe you're ticked off at someone and you want to send them a scathing email about something. So you blind copy your friend so that your friend gets to see how clever your reply was in this email. This gets a lot of people in trouble. BCC is never about exposing or aha or so on. It's actually about giving someone necessary information so that they also don't get copied in on the reply. So it's just as bold as copying them in. You know you're creating a legal record of giving someone this information, but you've removed them from the reply chain so that if someone answers the email, this person's inbox doesn't get spammed. So just give some etiquette to how you use the BCC. A big faux pas is altering the original message. So if I've emailed you and then you hit reply, you could be typing in your reply, but you don't go into my original and reword anything I said. There's actually legalities surrounding that. So you can't delete parts of it or change the wording or whatever. You may go in and answer in a orderly way. So maybe I sent you 5 paragraphs about something. You could go in and answer about each paragraph, that's fine, but it's actually not allowed etiquette-wise, and even legally could get you into trouble if you were to alter what my original text was because you were creating a false record of something that I didn't say. Recognize what your company's rules are for auto signature and privacy statements. Sometimes you need a legal sentence about what the privacy of that particular email is. And then if you find you're dealing with clients and service providers and so on, and sometimes your email gets into the spam filter by accident, avoid using any kind of symbols in the subject line. So if you've used the and sign or a colon or so on, a lot of firewalls and spam filters in companies are set up to automatically filter symbols out. So if they show up in the subject line, there's a good chance that that's going to end up in someone's spam filter. So just be aware of that. You want to really use only full words, not even texting speak. If you were to say shorten the word you, like Y-O-U, and just put the letter U and it looks like texting speak, there's also spam filters for that, so that a lot of the filters recognize someone's not using proper English. This might just be a robot. We're going to delete that and filter that. So if I'm going to save your life on one thing, this is going to be it. Keep a Post-it note on your laptop. Now, I actually have one on my laptop all the time. It's just a little mini Post-it note. I use it for actually a couple different things, but I do keep it on my laptop for different uses. And one of the uses would be to sort of hit the pause button on hitting send. So maybe I'm writing a really comprehensive email and I know I'm doing a little bit of research, or I'm sending attachments or doing things and I know I need a lot more data before I just hit send. You can take that Post-it note and just stick it at the bottom of your screen where that send button was. And that way you know you have this visual to just stop and pause before you hit send, especially if you work in a high traffic environment. It's so easy to think that you've got the information in there and then people are distracting you and all these customers are coming at you and so on. And so you think you've done the email and you click send just to get it out of the way. Not best practice. So maybe hang on to a couple Post-it notes on your screen and maybe that'll save your life. You can also set flags to your emails. So in your email options, right when you're crafting it, so for each individual email, as you're crafting it, you get an opportunity to set the importance to high, normal, or low. So if it's information only, of course, it would just be your default, normal, maybe low priority. Don't be the overuser of the high. If everything you send is marked high priority, you will become the boy who cried wolf and no one will think that your emails are high priority at all. So take a little bit of time in just emailing yourself. Go into your email program and open up an email as if you're going to email yourself and play around with the different options and settings in there. Change your auto signature, change the importance, and the feature I love in a lot of the email programs, you can even change when an email is going to get sent. So you could create the whole thing and then maybe it has to go out at 5 a.m. You can program it so that it goes out tomorrow at 5 a.m. Those are super great tools to use. And have you ever been the one? I've been the one. I gotta confess. Have you ever been the one who's like, oh, here's that document you were asking for. Send. And then, oops, 2 minutes later, you have to go back and send another email saying, sorry, I forgot to send the attachment. Here it is. Well, here again, the Post-it note can save your life. If you know that you have to send an attachment, take that little Post-it note that you have on your screen, stick it into your email so that you send the attachment. The Post-it note's your visual, like tying the string on your finger. And actually, even if you mention it, the best practice would be to stop typing right then and attach the attachment. As soon as you mention the document, stop and attach it. Another trick people sometimes use so that they don't get send happy is they'll take their mouse out of the equation. So you're typing away on your screen and you're doing all your big typing. You take your mouse and you put it out of arm's reach. This is sort of like putting the string on your finger, because then when you go to reach for the mouse to hit send, you have a visual where your brain goes, wait a sec, why is my mouse 4 feet away? And then you're like, oh yeah, I have to make sure to send the attachment. That's why I moved my mouse. Google will give you a warning. So if you've used the word attach or attached or here is the document, it recognizes a lot of these phrases and it'll pause you. I think Microsoft Outlook does it too, actually, where it recognizes certain buzzwords and it'll say, are you sure you're going to send this without an attachment? But don't just only rely on those. Give yourself some of the other tools to be able to send the attachment. And of course, doing the preview of the message before you send it, always, you can save it as a draft and so on. But when you put the attachment in, you can click on that attachment. Usually it's like a double click and it opens up and you get a little preview of it so that you know you attached the right one before you hit send. And then, of course, doing your paperclip first. So especially if you know the whole reason you're emailing someone is about an attachment, you have to send them a document, a file, a photo, whatever, before you type anything. You could always do the paperclip first and get that option. Now, if any of you use computers for a long time, you know that that actually is the step that used to be a problem. It used to be that whenever you stopped to do your attachment, it interrupted all of your text. And so you could end up with this big icon and attachment in the middle of all of this text, and it kind of messed everything up. And that's really why people were in the habit of doing attachments at the end of an email. That's been cured. Good news, there's a cure for that. That's been cured. And now, by and large, the email programs recognize an attachment in a separate place. And so when you attach it, even in the middle of all your typing, if you stop and click the paperclip, it's not going to wreck your formatting. It's going to neatly put your attachment in a place that won't wreck it all. So if that's your story from years gone by, recognize you can do that paperclip attachment function first before you do anything else. Now, we're all living in this era right now, right? Different crises, different emergencies happen. Sometimes they happen on a big scale, like what we're in right now, right? This is a big scale emergency or crisis affecting many people. But a lot of the crises are actually industry specific or company specific. Maybe if your company, factory experienced a fire in the production line, you would be going through an absolutely massive crisis that's not affecting the business next to you. So just recognizing that there are organization-wide crises, there's also industry-wide. You know, if you're in the meat processing industry and there was an outbreak of BSE, you'd be experiencing a crisis shared with many companies and many different levels of stakeholders, but not the globe necessarily. And then, of course, there's regional emergencies or, gosh, worldwide pandemic emergencies. And whatever that level is, if you find it's for your company or your region or something much broader, often the rules totally change about email. And nobody tells you they changed. They just change overnight, and you have to adapt and figure it out. And probably the very first thing that changes in every crisis is people get tired really quickly of emails, like almost instantly. Within 2 days, there will be email fatigue, because in the crisis, people start to do a couple things. They start to manage the crisis and try to send communications and correspondences and crisis management things by email. And then they also try to do touch points with staff and create relationships and make sure that communication is flowing. And, you know, a good example of that, a real modern day example, would be when school was first canceled just after spring break this year. I was getting like 10 to 12 emails a day from 3 different schools for my children, and they all had multiple teachers, and multiple teachers are emailing all these updates and assignments and plans. 10 to 12 emails a day only about homework is too much. So recognizing a common shared thing that happens in the crisis is definitely the fatigue. Often chain of command changes. So you might have your regular supervisor, but they might be absconded to another department or branch or so on. And so chain of command can change quickly, but be aware that chain of command is still real in email. If you don't have access day to day to the company's CEO because you're not a direct report from them, then do not be emailing them in the crisis either. I love the example of Mayor Rudy Giuliani during 9/11. He left the office instantly when the planes crashed. He left instantly and went to ground zero, and he stayed there for days and days and days, working and managing the crisis. So he was unavailable by email. Only his very, very closest associates had access to his cell phone number and to his email. So don't think that just because there's a crisis and that the guy in charge or your CEO, that she suddenly needs to care about what you say because of the crisis. You still need to respect the chain of command of who's your supervisor and what's the proper rapport. Clutter is huge. Just emailing to get something off your chest is bad etiquette any time of day, but way worse during a crisis. So recognizing, remember last session I talked about selfish emails, right? Sometimes we email selfishly because we need to move it off of our plate and put it onto someone else's plate. So sometimes we selfishly reply with, I don't know, what do you think? And really that's selfish because it doesn't answer anything, and it just sort of pushes it back into someone else's inbox because we don't have the time to deal with it. That's heightened during a crisis and emergency. So be aware of that, and be aware of your time of day. If you are sending an email at 3 a.m., it looks a lot like you were not able to sleep last night. And so along with whatever the message of your email is, comes a layer of worry about, are the employees sleeping? What's going on? Or it raises the importance because it's like, this person was up at 3 a.m. to send me this email. The house must be burning down. So pay real close attention to the timing of those emails. Legalities are huge. What you're promising customers and clients and what you're telling them, you might be making your company liable for things that you don't realize. So recognizing who's that public office in your company that does the public correspondence, and does your auto signature need to change during the crisis about what the legality is. Mental health, don't underestimate it. And don't think that just because you're behind a computer screen and they can't see you, that they're not able to be impacted by your own mental health. So recognizing the self-care for that, the tricks for that, and then what is someone else going through and how is the emergency affecting them. And you know, if we were in a retail environment, let's just imagine being in a restaurant and the kitchen started on fire. Well, the chef and the manager and the people in the back of the house, they would be dealing with that emergency, but who would get the mental health anxiety? It would also be the servers dealing with shuffling patrons outside and settling up and calming people down. So just recognize, what role is that other person in, and is there some impact happening to their mental health? And that will affect how you email them, when you email them, and if you should email them. And then capacity. We all have a limit. Now we can grow our capacity. I love talking about capacity building. It's a super cool topic that if you got me off on that bunny trail, I may not come back. But you can't do everything at the same time or have everything. They say sometimes you can have everything, just not all at once. So recognizing capacity, even for yourself. If you need to tune out and become unavailable, sometimes I have to work on a project for a different company. And so the company that I usually talk to day to day, I may mention to them, you know, I'm going to be unavailable for 3 days because I'm working on this other project. And so they know that my capacity is, I'm not going to be answering email for 3 days. And if they really need me, they need to pick up the phone and call, because my capacity for email is shut off. So that's recognizing your own and your coworkers also. When we're in that crisis and emergency, every little thing changes, right? We don't know the moment that the water droplet in the bucket makes the water overflow from the bucket. And so I just think a real practical example is like when someone's traveling. If you had to travel for work, you have this segment of time that you're unavailable. If you're traveling by car, you can't be emailing and doing all that while you're driving the vehicle. If you're traveling by plane, you shut off your data and you're not really that accessible while you're in the air. And so recognizing that every little thing is counting, because maybe somebody's in that travel mode and you're sending them 10 emails, and then when they get online again, they have to sift through and figure out which email is supposed to come first. I don't even know. Well, this is just a great thing to remember, that in the crisis and emergency, less is more, right? Not less collaboration and problem solving, but less in the emergency correspondence and the grasping really quickly for what people need. So is it a local, regional, organizational, or worldwide emergency? And if it is, how have the rules changed? And probably no one's going to tell you that they did change. It's just recognizing that they are emerging and adapting. Now we have a few more little tips and tricks and information things that we want to go through. But I do want to invite Jessica to join us online, because before we finish the very end of this workshop, we want to do a little bit of housekeeping. And if we do this together now, it's going to save you from getting a phone call or an email to follow up on. So Jessica, help us with this step.
Thank you, Rochelle, and hello, participants. Isn't Rochelle amazing? Why don't you give her a happy face or sad face? I'm sure you're going to give her a lot of happy faces and tell her how you feel about the information that she's just given you. Thank you. So in the chat area, I have added a link to a JOT form. And what that is a questions that I'm going to ask you to answer. There's only a few. It takes a moment. So I'm going to ask you right now to download that onto or click on it, answer the questions. We'll give you a few moments to answer it. I do get the notifications on the telephone as soon as you're done. So just take a moment and do that particular form so we can get your feedback. And that's very important to help us with lessons and the lesson today. So I'll give you a few moments and let you do that. We've just received 2 of them. Thank you. 3. 4. Thank you. Just waiting on a few more people to complete their forms. Thank you. Thank you. All right. I want to thank all the participants for filling out that form. And Rochelle, everyone has done their job, so go ahead and continue. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, you guys. I want to read you something that's a little bit interesting. It's someone's reflections on their front porch looking out, and they say, "It's dawn on a summer morning. I'm sitting quietly in my rocker on the front porch, and my hands are cupped around a steaming cup of coffee. The birds are waking up, and there's a stillness. My neighbors are still asleep. As I look up and down the street, I realize that each quiet house has its own story to tell. One of my neighbors is coping with unemployment, and down the street, another neighbor is planning a backyard wedding for her daughter. And next door, a single mother is struggling with the ravages of divorce." And then a little later, the writer goes on to talk about that moment of stillness contrasted to the workday. And they say, "The workday goes by so fast. I wake up before dawn, I grab a cup of coffee, and I race off to the office. At work, I'm running constantly between meetings, picking up voicemail, returning calls, reading and responding to email, trying to get some work done before the next meeting. And at the end of the day, I rush home too. I can get lost in all of this." And I guess I just wanted to read those little reflections for you because I think that it shows a great picture of the sender and the receiver of the emails, right? If we have that stillness reflection on the front porch of who are the people that I'm interacting with and what are they going through, it puts us in a much different position for that later busy reflection where we're keeping up with and trying to stay on top of the projects and doing all that. So that bit of mindfulness can be so helpful in the planning, organizing, writing, proofing, and rewording of emails. Is this stat not completely astounding? Depending on your industry and your role within it, could you even imagine that up to 5 hours a day could be spent checking email, answering emails, and so on? Now, you might be a frontline email worker, meaning that you have the type of position that you're tied to your email, you can't leave it. You have to be giving instant reactions and correspondence out there. If you are that person, that's a part of your role, and the provision for the 5 hours a day is worked into your role. If you're not that person, but you just have email as a part of your company correspondence, I want to encourage you that one of the email etiquette practices you could incorporate into your workday is to choose when you do email. Now, this is tough. It takes a ton of self-conquering management to be able to do this. But one of the leaders I worked for, he was so good at this. He had 2 times a day that he checked his email. And it wasn't even first thing in the morning, because first thing in the morning, you're sharp and productive. And if you have writing and production to do, that's a great time to do it. So it was mid to late morning that he gave himself the time he would check email. And then towards the end of the day, he had another segment of time that he would go in and check email. So I want to encourage you to just think about when do I actually go and look at the email, and how do I manage my time with that? Part of managing yourself as a professional is also just scheduling the time in. So I know that at this time of day, that's when I'm checking email, that's when I'm answering email, and outside of that, I'm not going to let email derail me from my other tasks and things that I want to accomplish. One of the things we covered that we talked about is just thinking about, are the components of my email all there? And do they fit this category? As in, have I given thoughtfulness to it? So before I speak, I think. Are the facts true? Is the email helpful? Is the whole context helpful? Does it inspire someone or call someone to action? Are there necessary components all covered in there? And what was my tone like? Did I think about the tone? And this could even go on a Post-it note on your desk. This is a great thing to help us sort of guard ourselves and consider our email and its etiquette. And in that vein, there's just one other thing we want to touch on, and it's just sort of evaluating. Imagine if every email you send to your coworkers had to fit into one of 2 categories, positive or negative. I know it's hard to think of that because it might just be a business thing, right? Like, we need this many things made and distributed today. And so we just think of things in numbers and quantities and deadlines. But some people tend to use email only for bad news. They use it only for the negative. This is needed, this is done, this was wrong, this needs to be evaluated, and so on. And they forget that email is actually a positive tool. So we see this on Google. If you look at Google business reviews, you get the opportunity to review a business and leave a comment about it. And the best practice for that businesses have adopted is, if you've done that, we'll give you an answer. So they reply to all of those things. And we see that those replies are always positive or problem solving or helpful. And so just keep that in the back of your mind about filtering. Do I only use email for intense and sometimes negative or critical timing type of pieces? Or overall, could people say that actually my emails are helpful and necessary as the majority? Is that, and do I give out praise? Can I use my emails to also give positive feedback, praise, and reviews from things? And one of the ways to not get lost is those email folders. Now, I talked about them just a little bit last time, but this is my last trick for you today. I just want to give you a great trick to be able to use your email file folders. I personally don't think you can have too many. People love to debate this, and they say, oh, you should only have 3 or 4 that you can see all in the thumbnail. I have like dozens of email folders because I get a little bit attached to some of the things, and I think, oh, maybe I need that, and so I tend to delete it a little bit later. But in the meantime, have a place to store it. If you really could manage your email file folders, you will give yourself so much space and peace in your email window when you open it. And if you get behind on your inbox, do an email file folder called inbox dump. So if I was going to do it right now, I would call it, my 2020 inbox dump. And I'd move everything from my inbox into there so that I'm dealing with a clean and empty inbox every day now for the rest of the week. And then I know that I can schedule time in to go back into that folder and not only find things, but delete and pair and answer and retrieve and so on. So I hope that's helpful for you. And I'm curious if just 2 or 3 of you wanted to share, if there's one of the tips, one of the tricks, one of the parts of the writing process of the 1, 2, 3 that you'd bring to your workplace. Could you share that with us in the chat over to the side? I'd just love to see what trick resonated with you, or if there's a tip that you thought, hey, I'd like to try that one. And you do have an opportunity to put it in the chat where everybody can see the answer, or you can send it privately to me as the instructor and I could see it privately so no one else knows it's coming from you. Good. I hope the Post-it note trick is helpful for you, that you keep that on your computer to not only be a pause issue for you, but also something that you can even keep over top of your webcam or keep it down on your keyboard to help you with setting things up. Good. I hope that your personal dictionary helps when you're planning and proofreading and so on. So that's really awesome. I thank Jessica. She did post again the download for the email etiquette handout. So that's notes that you can take away with you today. I really thank you for doing that jot form. That's helpful because that gives us this analysis right away about which components we can dig in a little deeper on and which ones are helpful or can be deleted off the list. So that's really great. And then I want to give you a heads up that you will get a phone call. It's a short call. I've had to make them in the past. I won't be calling you about this particular one, but someone from our office will call you in about 2 to 3 months. And typically they ask, how did the workshop go? Was there anything you implemented? Has it maybe saved you time in the workplace or impacted you in a positive way? So that phone call will come, and we just really value it because it helps keep the instructors on track for content, and then it also helps Workplace Education Manitoba in providing meaningful content to others and hearing your feedback. So that call will come, don't be surprised, and then we'll ask you to dig back in your memory from a couple months ago to think about the email etiquette class. I invite Jessica to join me again because I'm going to say a farewell to you. And just to reply, I see one private question and I'll reply to that privately and then we're going to sign off.
Excellent. Thank you, Rochelle. I appreciate your attention so much. And I'd like to thank the participants, number one, for attending today. I know this was our part 2, and I appreciate your presence as well as your comments and your interaction. Thank you so much for filling out the jot form as well. And I want to remind everyone to go to WEM at, or I should say www.wem.interlake.ca to look at the summer lineup for webinars that the Interlake region will be presenting. So I'm excited to tell you about that. They will be up shortly, so please check if they're not showing right away. And I'd also like to again thank Rochelle Amy for her energy and her words of wisdom. She always gives a lot of value to these workshops, and this is why Workplace Education Manitoba continues to ask her to return over and over again.